I was going to talk about something else today, something probably about portfolios or giving the middle finger to the algorithm, but here we are. But then I watched federal troops march through Los Angeles like it was Fallujah. Watching ICE agents hunt people through neighborhoods that I've walked in, I've eaten in, photographed in. I've watched Americans get gassed for the crime of saying this is fucked up. I've watched journalists get shot with rubber bullets just for reporting the news on the front lines. So here we are. Look, I make pictures for a living. I worry about light and composition and whether my clients are happy. They're kind of small concerns in the grand scheme of things, you know. But I also have eyes. And what I'm seeing right now isn't America having a policy debate. It's America having a nervous breakdown. Marines deployed to guard immigration raids. Not to defend the homeland, but to round people up whose paperwork expired. People who've been here longer than some of the agents hunting them. People whose kids are in Little League, whose mortgages are current, whose taxes are paid, whose only mistake was believing that doing the right thing, like showing up for court, for example, following the rules would protect them. That's what America is all about, right? The land of immigrants, because everybody came from somewhere and didn't protect them. And when citizens gather to say, wait, this isn't us, when students and local leaders and normal, regular folk who probably couldn't find an ICE headquarters on a map decided to stand up, and they got tear gas and rubber bullets for their trouble. Look, here in San Diego, I see this machinery of fascism up close. ICE vans parked outside of coffee shops near the Home Depot. Checkpoints on the roads that I use to take my kids to school. And the disconnect between the America that I thought that I lived in and the one that's unfolding outside of my window is considerable. And maybe this podcast right now, what you're hearing, seems a little off-brand, and perhaps it is. Maybe you came here to learn about strategy or imposter syndrome, burnout, creative authenticity. But authenticity means calling it like you see it, you know? And what I see is a country that's forgotten the difference between enforcement and provocated violence. The only question now is whether we are going to document this, what's happening around us, or pretend like it's not happening. That's the question that I want to talk about today. My name is Patrick Four. This is a Terrible Photographer podcast. Today's episode is called Tear Gas and Pixels. Segment 1, the frame is the weapon. And that's the phrase that I just keep coming back to. The frame is the weapon. What we choose to photograph and what we choose to crop out shapes how the world sees reality. You want to know why so many people in power hate journalists, hate photographers? Because we show what actually happened. The cracked skull, the raised baton, the blood in the grass, the knee on the neck, the child separated from their mother. Photographs, they don't flinch. They don't try to spin it. They don't have talking points. They hold people accountable long after the press conference ends. Think about it. Kent State, 4 dead students became a turning point in American consciousness, not because of the speeches or the editorials, but because of a single photograph, a girl screaming over Jeffrey Miller's body. The frame ended a fucking presidency. Rodney King, 81 seconds of amateur video that revealed what Black Americans have been saying for decades. The frame became evidence. The weapon became justice. And that's why image makers are often the first targets. Because if they can't shut down the cameras, they can rewrite the story. And right now we are watching a masterclass in narrative control. The federal government is calling peaceful protesters agitators. They're calling documentation fake news. They're calling accountability bias from the left. Frames, they don't lie. And when you see a Marine in full combat gear facing down a 25-year-old student holding a sign, you don't need a caption to understand that power dynamic. When you see families running from men in tactical gear, when you see men with badges ripping children from people's arms, you don't need a spokesperson to explain that fear. And maybe you're listening to this and you're thinking, look, I'm not a photojournalist. I shoot weddings. I shoot brands. I shoot products. I shoot landscapes. What does this have to do with me? And I would argue, if you're holding a camera, you are very much a part of this. Because image making, even in the most commercial sense, is never neutral. Every frame is a choice. Every edit is an argument, and every post, I believe, is a position. And when you learn to really see, you start to recognize just how many people have been systematically cropped out. The immigrant worker who cleaned the venue before your wedding shoot. The undocumented family living in the shadows of the neighborhood you're gentrifying with your lifestyle content. The protests happening 3 blocks away where you're shooting a brand campaign about authentic living. And you can't unsee it once you start looking, and that changes everything. Here's the part that I don't want to say. And here's the part I don't really want to say. But I'm going to say it anyway, because it's been kind of gnawing at me as I've been looking at hundreds of pieces of content, photo and video over the past few days. While students are getting zip tied on sidewalks and just normal people are getting tackled and gassed, when families are being torn apart by men with badges cosplaying as heroes. I've seen photographers out there shooting these things, not looking to be truth tellers, but looking for clout, looking for influence, looking for Instagram fame, looking for money. Treating a protest like it's an Instagram model, an opportunity to go viral. And look, I'm not trying to gatekeep the right to document and to tell stories. That's the opposite of what I'm trying to talk about. But you can kind of feel the difference, sometimes between someone who's there to witness and someone who's there to perform. One tells the truth and the other builds a brand. And I understand if it bleeds, it leads. It's been the case of journalism forever. I was just at a protest last weekend here in San Diego, and it was like a very small protest in Barrio Logan, and literally only like 40 people there. But I felt like a lot of the media thought it was going to be bigger, but turned out to be just not a big thing at all. On one side of the park, you had this small protest, about 40 people, And then on the other side of the park, it was just like a normal park, like people playing basketball, people skateboarding, and families at picnic tables having lunch. And the news media was there, and there was photographers there, and they didn't focus on the protest. I sat in the back and just watched the spectacle. I watched what was happening, and I saw these news organizations, and some of them were like Telemundo, some of them were like a local NBC channel, some of them were stringers, and they weren't covering the protests. There was one guy that looked scary, he had a black bandana covering his mouth and sunglasses and a cap, and he was holding a sign that said "fuck ICE." And nobody wanted to cover the protest, but they wanted to cover him. They wanted to shoot him. They wanted to interview that guy because that guy looked the most interesting and the most scary. I think that happens a lot. And this is the problem, that's what's happening in Los Angeles is you have 95% of the protest is very, very peaceful, right? And there is some inappropriate, illegal behavior that looks really scary in a very small pocket, right? For instance, you might have Waymo cars being set on fire and garbage dumpsters being set on fire and a few outliers throwing rocks at federal agents' cars, which obviously behavior I don't condone. I'm not saying that's good. But that's a small pocket of what's actually happening, and that's what people cover, right? And it's that footage, it's those images that end up on the national news. And so what do you think happens when people from Iowa or Ohio or Louisiana or Florida watch these clips that are on loop, right? Over and over again? You're like, man, LA really is full on third world riot happening, but really it's nothing. Most of it is peaceful protests. Like literally 95% of it is just people marching with signs. But that's not how it leads, because that's not a really good, interesting photograph. It doesn't make interesting video. But people throwing rocks at cop cars and setting cars on fire, that makes an interesting photo. Listen, I think there are two different types of photographers at these events. There are one who is interested in telling the story, in making sure that people see what's actually happening, telling the truth on the ground as it's happening. Whether that's a journalist being shot by a rubber bullet or Angelenos serving hot dogs to protesters, they're covering it all. But then there's other photographers, other content creators, they're just trying to build a brand. And if you're there photographing a protest to raise your platform, if you're treating tear gas like it's an aesthetic choice, I would argue you're not really a documentarian. You're not doing journalism. You're just a tourist. And there's no honor in capturing pain while distancing yourself from the cause. And I say this as someone who has made interesting, beautiful things. I understand the pull of light and shadow, the dream of the movement, the poetry and chaos, that there's interesting stories to tell in those cases. And I understand the adrenaline rush it's like to be in those moments and to capture stunning and beautiful and tragic and horrific and cinematic images in your camera. But real documentary work, it's not necessarily about the shot itself. It's about the subject, you know? It's about understanding when people are bleeding and when people are risking arrest and assault, when people are putting their bodies on the line for something bigger than themselves. The least that you can do is not to use them as a backdrop for your next engagement spike. The least that you can do is remember that these are human beings, not content opportunities. I want to share something that I read from LA photographer Chelsea Lauren, someone who's been out there actually documenting what's happening in Los Angeles. She wrote this on a recent Instagram post. There are no riots in LA. Let me repeat it. There are no capital N-O riots in LA. She explained that the photos, the ones that make the city look like a war zone, are real, but they're very specific and they're focused. Shot right at the skirmish line where police and protesters clash. And just about 200 feet in any direction, it's business as usual. A typical LA day. Protests contained to a single block while the rest of the city shops for groceries, picks up takeout, takes their kid to soccer practice. And then she shared something else, something quiet. She wrote that after one protest, police kettled a group of demonstrators near Pershing Square. And protesters took shelter in a nearby apartment building. And the residents opened their doors and hid them. They protected them. There's no arrests. There's no violence, no headline. Just people doing what people should do. And Chelsea ended her post with this. I love my city. Tonight, it lived up to its name, truly a city of angels. That's the photograph too. It's not necessarily meant to go viral, but it matters just as much. Segment 3, the photographer as witness. I think there's a sacred responsibility in being the one who sees, not the first to post, not the one who with the fastest caption, not the one with the most followers, but the one who sees, the one who shows up, camera in hand, heart and throat, and asks, what does the world need to see right now? I've been thinking about this a lot lately, about what it means to be a witness, not just to beauty, not just to joy, but to injustice, to violence, to the moments when power reveals its true ugly face. And there are photographers out there right now who will never get hired by an agency, never shoot a cover story, never win an award, but they are doing the real work. Quiet, risky, underfunded. And they stand between the lie and the proof. They're the ones documenting the ICE raids at 5 a.m. when no one else is awake. They're the ones following up on families 3 months later when the news cycle has moved on. They're the ones getting arrested or shot with the rubber bullets for filming police brutality, then posting bail to go right back out with their cameras. And I think that we forget that sometimes. That people are so radically committed to truth telling. They're willing to risk jail time, their finances, their body, even their life to tell the truth. And their work doesn't have to be flawless, but it is necessary. That the truth doesn't have to have this Instagram polish to it. It just needs light. Some of the most important photographs in American history are pretty technically terrible. They're blurry, they're grainy, off center. But they showed something that we needed to see. The liberation of concentration camps, the Birmingham fire hoses, the falling man. These images changed the world, not because they were beautiful necessarily, but because they were true. And right now in Los Angeles, in cities across the country, there are photographs doing that work. The sounds of shutter being heard across the world, documenting what happens when federal troops occupy American streets, showing what happens when the Constitution is ignored and becomes a suggestion, revealing what happens when law and order becomes a weapon against the most vulnerable. Honest photography isn't about having the right lens or knowing how to dodge and burn in Photoshop. It's about having the guts to stand in the dangerous space and point your camera at something that no one else wants to see and keeping it there. It's about understanding that your job isn't to make people comfortable. It's to make them aware. And sometimes awareness is not comfortable. Sometimes the truth is ugly. Sometimes the frame that matters most is the one that makes people turn away in disgust. But you don't turn away. You keep shooting. You keep showing, because that's what witnesses do. Segment 4, the historical echo. And this isn't the first time. American history is full of moments when photographers became the conscience of the nation. American history is full of moments when photographers became the conscience, when power overreached and the violence erupted, when the comfortable distance between us and them collapsed, and photographers were there. Jacob Rios showing us how the other half lives. Dorothy Lang documenting the Depression. Gordon Parks revealing the reality of segregation. But it's in these moments of state-sanctioned violence that cuts deepest. Kent State, like I mentioned, 1970, students protesting the expansion of the Vietnam War. The National Guard troops were deployed to, quote, restore order. Order was not restored, and 4 were dead, 9 wounded, and 1 photograph changed everything. John Philo's image of Mary Ann Vecchio screaming over Jeffrey Miller's body, a moment of absolute grief, captured in black and white for the world to see. And the photograph just didn't document what happened. It ended the illusion that American troops wouldn't fire on American students. It made the abstract concrete. It made the political personal. And it helped end a war. And now we have Marines on American streets again, not protecting us from foreign enemies like they enlisted and trained to do, but enforcing domestic policies from a wannabe king. Not responding to invasion, but people seeking refuge, not maintaining peace, but suppressing dissent. And the echo is deafening. And just like in the 1970s, the cameras are what stands between the official story from the government and the truth. And the difference now is that everyone has a camera. Everybody in their pocket has a 4K camera. Everyone can be a witness. But not everyone understands what witnessing means. Not everyone grasps the weight of the frame. So segment 5, what can you do? And maybe you're listening to this and you're thinking, man, I'm not out there. I'm not on the ground. What can I do? The answer is more than you think. First, you can call bullshit when you see it. When someone shares a video that's been edited to remove the context, you can provide the full story. When a politician like Ted Cruz posts a video clip of a riot from like 6 years ago, you can call bullshit. When someone posts a photo that's been cropped to change the meaning, you can share the wider frame if it's available. When someone spreads misinformation about what's happening, you can correct it with documented facts. You can amplify real documentation from protesters, from people on the ground, from people who live in the city. I don't need to hear what life in Los Angeles is like from somebody living in Dallas. You know how many times I've heard from somebody in Pennsylvania or Wisconsin how crazy, how much of a liberal wasteland California is. I go to San Francisco and LA frequently. I work in LA a lot. I don't see it. Maybe I don't go to the right parts, but I don't know what you're talking about. You can support journalists who are doing the work. People like Chelsea Lauren, kick her a few bucks, buy their prints, share their stories, fund the next project. But if you're local like me, show up. Not for content, not for clout, but because people are being harmed, and silence is how this shit spreads. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have all the answers. You just have to care enough to be present. Use your camera to tell the truth. Use your platform, even if it's small, to bring some clarity, not confusion. When your Aunt Susie says that LA is just full of riots, correct her. Like, no, not Aunt Susie, you're wrong. Use your voice to speak for those who can't. And most of all, don't look away. Resist that urge. Even if it's gut-wrenching, even if it's a ICE agent ripping a toddler away from her mother's arms, don't look away. Don't let them normalize this shit. Don't let them convince you that federal troops on American streets is just politics as usual. Don't let them tell you that documenting injustice is, quote, taking sides. I hear this all the time when it gets brought up that this is a political conversation. This is not a political conversation. This is a human conversation about something that's affecting humans, just like you, just like me. And don't let them crop you out of your own democracy. Because here's what I know about frames, about images. The most powerful ones were taken by those who refuse to look away. The ones that insist on including what others want to exclude. The ones that force us to see what we would rather ignore. That's the image, that's the frame that we need right now, wide enough to show the whole picture and sharp enough to capture all the details and honest enough to change some minds. Photography was never supposed to just be about likes or engagement. It's not even about paychecks. It's not about curating a perfect little feed to prove that we exist or to show how great our life is. It's always been about something bigger, about something stronger, something more dangerous. Photography, yes, is how we remember and how we refuse to forget. It's how we cut powerful men down to size and how we lift the forgotten up to where the kings and queens used to stand. Yes, it sells a product, but it can also stop a bullet. It's protest and poetry, commerce and confession. It's how we say, I saw this. This happened and this matters. To photograph is to take notice, to stare down what most people would rather blur out. To watch the faces of the poor and the gestures of the proud. To see strange things, machines and shadows and sorrow. To look at the world and to keep looking. And when you're tired of looking, you look some more. To keep showing up. And you keep shooting. You keep seeing. Friends, in this moment, It is so important for us to stay courageous, to exist in spaces where others cannot, to be a voice for the voiceless, to stand in the margins. Because these strong men who wield all the power, that's where they turn to first. The weakest among us. They're cowards. They are boring men with no good ideas left. Stay courageous. Stay kind. Stay curious. And yeah, stay fucking terrible.